This is my Megabase Hub. It allows me to permanently research prod at the equivalent of 8 full green belts of each science, supporting 1,000 fully beaconed labs. And it does this while only using around 800 bots active on average. It's a chaotic mess, but there is an order to it, and I will argue that it has to be somewhat chaotic if you want to make it efficient. First of all, the hub is arguably the most important structure in a megabase, as it dictates the placement of a huge amount of structures around it, like the huge lab arrays, calcite export, chest of base. And you also need to design this fairly early on, because megabase requirements are research heavy and you can't research fast without a decent one. But you also don't necessarily know how to structure it until you have the experience with a megabase. So unless you want to experience the pain of moving a hub with millions of items inside of it multiple times, here are a couple of ideas to hopefully guide you along with a small rundown of my hub. So first, why the chaos? A megabase is battling with a fundamental throughput limitation that you are more or less guaranteed to hit above 1 million SPM, the megabase level. And you only really hit this at that level. To see that, you gotta look at the hub yourself here. Let me turn off the Promethean research so that you can actually see what's going on. Because the hub itself is a square with 8 tiles on each side, giving you at most room for 32 inserters, but then you have to you lose 2 due to connecting the base. So there's at most 30 inserters you can cover the hub in, giving you at most 30 times 120 items per second that you can pull out with inserters alone. And that's if you're using legendary stack inserters. So that gives you at most 15 full stacked green belts. Everything else you pull out of the hub has to go by bots. And if you're targeting a base with, say, 4 full belts of each science, giving you roughly 1 million effective SPM, and you're pulling 5 sciences from space, then you need 4 times 5 full belts of the sciences to be pulled out of the hub somehow. That means you have to transport the equivalent of 5 full belts by bots. That's not too bad. But if you scale that up, and say you want to double it, you want 8 full belts of each science, and you pull the same 5 sciences from space, now you need 8 times 5, 40 full belts. And still only 15 can come from the inserters. So that means you now have to do 25 belts by bots. So you've doubled the SPM, but you've quintupled the bot usage. So that's the problem with hitting this throughput limit. Everything beyond this point becomes expensive to do because bots themselves are not cheap. And it's hard to fully estimate how expensive they are, but if you compare Megabase saves around a bit, my experience at the very least is that you can either spend your UPS budget on 10,000 bots around this area, or you can spend it on like an obscene amount of Promethean ships, and you can see my choice. I don't think you can do both. Maybe you would have to have a very good setup. I certainly can't do it, and that is despite having like a high-end Ryzen 9 X3D processor on Linux with all the optimizations. So while the primary purpose of a hub is to meet your throughput, the optimal hub is one that achieves this with as few active bots as possible. And there are only really 4 ways you can reduce your bot number. One is the obvious one: research worker robot speed, which gets less attractive as time goes on. It does help, don't get me wrong. You can and should research this, but you're not realistically going to get much improvement after a certain point. As you can see, there's huge diminishing returns. The research doubles every time. But it looks cool when the bots are this fast, but it's not a solution that's going to take you very far on its own. But just like speed matters, distance matters. Bots can do more trips without charging when the chests are as close as possible to the hub. So purely from like a geometrical standpoint, you'll optimize this distance best by creating a dense circular layer around the hub. The awkward part about making such a circle, it is not going to be perfectly circular and symmetrical. Like the bot center is actually on the top left side of the hub, so where all the bots come out here. So ideally, you need to shift your center, top left a little bit. And then you also need the bay connections, which completely screws with your symmetry. But because the bottom right is the biggest travel time for bots, you should probably connect the base there. My hub, as you can see, should be a little more top heavy, but it is also hard to shuffle things around when you want to maximize roboport density while also needing certain central structures to maximize throughput, which in my case is cars. And finally, on the distance, if you are doing quality sciences, those are really good to do at the end because they will be doing a lot fewer trips than the others. Thirdly, and this is probably the thing you should think about first, do nauvis sciences on nauvis. Keep Vulcanus small. Because for every million SPM, you would need another 4 belt equivalent of bots constantly active for each science you move to Vulcanus. And that's on top of the bot costs. Like, you also have platform UPS costs, like ship transport costs, asteroid costs, rocket component costs, because you gotta make oil and blue chips everywhere. So Vulcanus is a bit of an efficiency trap. It could have been interesting if you could put biolabs in Vulcanus, because then we could have made our base there, but alas. Like, contrasting this with doing things on nauvis, only thing you need is to export calcite. And it's just a tiny bit of import, and you have dodged all the bots. Like, for instance, this is all of the iron and copper I need for the equivalent of 1 million red and green signs. And you can see that calcite ticks down extremely slowly while producing thousands of molten copper. This is barely moving. There's a single train that is in charge of this stop. It's in charge of all of the stops. And this train is mostly sleeping. I have 2 trains like this, one on the top, one on the south, and it's just filled from the hub. And to actually supply that, I have a single patch like this just direct on here. And this piggybacks on my science import chip. So yeah, highly recommend doing science as nauvis, and because they also simplify the hub design quite a bit, because you can belt in all the nauvis sciences at the back. Because there are 6 of them, it works out perfectly with 3 mixed belts. And as a result, the hub area becomes purely dedicated to the import sciences, and that's great because that's like a very dense area. So absolutely the biggest easy win you can do for your hub, restrict it to the 5 imported sciences. Fourth and finally, focus on quality sciences where you can. Quality sciences, while slightly harder to make, divides the number of bots you need by 2. Like, see, all my uncommon stuff at the end just have a single chest. And some of the legendary ones actually share. Because if you need 1 million SPM, and say you were doing metallurgic Q1, which is what I'm doing, then I need 4 full belts transported by bots, 960 per second. If I did it at Q2, I would only need 2 full belts, i.e. 480 per second. And the higher quality also means less swings for the inserters in the labs, and there are 1,000 labs in this setup, so that means there's 1,000 affected inserters for this, so that's a non-trivial cost. So because of this, many of the imported sciences make a lot of sense to do with quality, even though they may not benchmark better on the production side alone. But this is also a reason to be skeptical of the micro benchmarking going around in Factorio, because there's all the number of 2x improvements here and there are not necessarily going to reflect reality when you integrate it. Particularly when you think about like computers, programs, and how cache misses work, because micro benchmarks are likely to give you a completely different order of cache hits than what you see when you put it in an otherwise busy base. So it's kind of hard to determine which sciences is worth quality. The import sciences make the most sense because they force bot use, but even they do not always behave better. Like, for instance, fulgora. There's a lot of people that use Q2 for fulgora science. I don't at the moment. I use Hobbit's Q1 islands. Because the Q2 ones are huge, they are very recycler heavy, inserter heavy, lots of scrap voiding, lots of belts. I tested a full Q2 setup in my base. It Like obviously it have the associated bot use on nauvis, it reduced the recycler use in labs, it have the transport costs. And I shifted from 10 of these islands to 2 of Q2 islands. And yet it was worse overall. Like it was close, but this one is not straightforward. So right now I'm on these islands because they're very easy to scale and they're basically foolproof, but there may be other Q2 designs that are better. But it's possible that you actually have to do the whole railgun voiding of ore thing to do it efficiently. As for the sciences that feel to have a more agreed meta, metallurgic is extremely easy to double. The factories are very small for this. Each blade of these does the equivalent of 4 full belts, so this is a full Q2 belt. So that's these two together, equivalent of 8 full belts of science. You need a lot of mining prod to make the upcycling as small as this, but you can always add more miners initially. At mining prod 2000 it starts getting compact like this. Cryogenic is also pretty easy to get to quality because the ice can be made in cryo chambers, and cryo chambers have a huge amount of module slots, so you can get a very good quality percent while also speed modulating them a little bit. The only hard part of cryo is that you need Q2 holmium, but it doesn't use that much of it, as you can see. So you can have a small export for this on Fulgora. Space science is currently the best one. You can currently upcycle all the way to Legendary with a small casino. This is Hobbit ship. Conage has another ship. Legendary is like 6x the value, so you divide the bot usage by 6. This one might not be viable long term, because they're talking about killing the space casinos in 2.1, so we'll see. And then you have the 2 questionable sciences. It's like, I talked about electromagnetic already. You got agricultural. This one, I mean, you did this in quality, and he showcases it in his Megabase video, but it is huge, and it is very plantation heavy. I doubt that personally it's worth it, UPS-wise, but I'm just kind of speculating on that one. And the last one, Promethean, which I have a video on this ship. Let's do the slightly newer variant. Like, I don't think this one makes sense at all mathematically to do, because either you upcycle the chunks and then you lose 75% of the chunk output to get 50% better chunks, and asteroid collection stuff is like 1/3 of the ship's UPS. Or the other way is to put quality in the cryos, and then that's objectively worse than productivity, as far as I can see it. So the main thing that I'm trying to convey here is that quality is better for bots, but it's not necessarily better holistically. And it's not clear which ones are even better holistically, and that answer may change. So right now you have 3 sciences that are great for quality, 2 that are questionable, and 1 that is not. That brings me to the hard question. What do you actually want to pull out from the hub via bots, and what do you want to pull out by inserters? Because throughput-wise, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, you can pull out uncommon or you can pull out common. The key difference in the quality science is only pulled at half the rate, so unless you want the belts to not back up, because then you don't get the most out of your inserter throughput, you will need to divide quality belts later. But that's a minor concern. The biggest concern is actually from the question, which sciences should I use quality for? Because if you change your mind on that, then the throughput for that science is going to change, and you might have to restructure parts of it. Particularly it's bad if you have to restructure the inner parts of the circle. Like if I made Promethean suddenly Q2, let me turn this off so I can see a little bit, then I'd only need half the amount of inserters pulling Promethean out of here. So that means I'd have to shift another science in here, and all of the belts that those affect would have to change. So and then that propagates all the way to the labs potentially, so that's a huge change. But if I only changed electromagnetic, which sits out here, all I need to do is, if I made it to Q2, I'd have the amount of chests, inserters, and everything would just work as before. So if you're uncertain about some sciences, I wouldn't pull them out of straight from the hub. I explicitly only pull Promethean and agricultural because it's the only ones I expect to never become quality. If you are doing a base targeting research prod, I would say do that, pull out the common sciences, but obviously you have to be careful with agricultural, because if you stop using it, it will spoil in the buffer, which for me is in this chest. I limit that somehow by only having a single thing available, and also it should never spoil because I crush agricultural at the end when I'm not researching it. But yeah, you don't want buffers of spoilables. But clearly this is becoming a bit subjective, and it depends on what you want to do with your base. And that gets worse, because if you're targeting another infinite research, like if say you care about worker robot speed, then all of this changes again. Like similarly, if you only do Promethean 20% of the time, maybe you're using the research combinator mod, then it's completely fine to do Promethean by bots. And then in that case, you should probably take electromagnetic out of the hub, because that's the thing you're using all the time if you're doing worker robot speed. So it's a hard question to answer decisively, because it's like me trying to answer the question, what should your base research when your base is finished? At any rate, I hope these thoughts are somewhat useful in guiding you to an answer. So let's talk about the cars. I use cars for the same reason people use trains. You want to maximize the surface area of the inserters, and you also want to maximize the throughput from the hub. If we inserted from these guys, the inserter straight on the hub, straight onto belts, then you'd only get a throughput of 80 items per second per inserter, compared to the maximum of 100 items per second that a legendary stack inserter can do between buildings. So we put cars, trains in between, and we can fit more inserters per hub inserter, and then we solve that problem. I prefer cars here over trains because the cars are way smaller, and thus they reduce the geometrical radius of the hub circle, so there's less travel distance by bots. And you can also utilize the space very efficiently, because like they have this weird grids, they're pixel placed, so they snap very weirdly to the inserter's pickup grid, as you can see for this one in particular. This inserter here, clearly in the same grid as the output on the left, but yet it can pick up from this car. Same for this one. That's you would normally be limited, but you can also pick out. So some nice cursed stuff that you can do there. And they're also nicer than trains in some ways, that they have a pretty big inventory, and they can also be filtered in the same way, and those filters can be copy-pasted. But they have some downsides. Obviously, the pixel placement is kind of janked. You have to get it right. You have to feed them some fuel, otherwise they have a big flashing warning on them. But yeah, they do help a lot for this type of dense area, and this is the only real area you need to be this dense in Space Age. So it's the only place I'm using them. Cars are great. Tanks are also cool. They are bigger, they are also pixel placed, and they also have a logistic network, so you can do all sorts of cursed things with them. But I have kept the cursedness of this base to a moderate level. So hopefully at this point you have a bit of a feel for what you want to do with your hub. So at the end here are a couple of easy optimizations, simple stuff that's not about geometry or big decisions. 1. Don't have a bunch of stuff in your hub. Inserters that pull out of the hub, there's a cost associated picking stuff out of a hub that has a lot of stuff in it, and this is an extremely large chest, effectively. Conage tested this, it increases with the amount of stuff and the amount of stuff in it, so you want to buffer all the building materials. So I have a bunch of requester buffer chests here that just pulls all of the stuff out of the hub if it's ever there. Similarly, you don't want to have a constant amount of stray requests on the hub, because that's space platform costs. So all of the things I need building mats for is put into this combinator here. It goes through a couple of networks that basically checks compares with what's in the network and sees, hey, do I have less than 20% of that? If so, give me a full stack of it. Whereas the sciences themselves, I just have a static number, and that goes in this combinator. So as a result of that, my hub generally only have 6 or 7 items, which is all the sciences, calcite, and maybe bioflux. Ideally, you also want to reduce the amount of these buffers as much as possible. I have them to kind of what I need for between each ship coming, and you can reduce that by having more ships, as I have done with agricultural. I actually have 4 ships, and they have only 80,000 science, which is 80 is the amount of launchers I have, so they all do 1, and all of the launchers are basically active. That does improve flow a bit, and it also means there's less drops, there's less stuff in buffers, so it's generally better. And also for Gleba it's particularly good because it means you don't wait to for the freshness to build to gradually spoil as you wait for the other loads. Right now this is not a thing I've focused on too much because I tested with Agri and it didn't make too much of a difference for me. But maybe it's a thing that makes more of a difference if you have a bigger scale of a base. My hub in particular has like an average 2 million items in them, and there's like 500 base less than. So maybe this makes more sense if you're doing a bigger scale. Final tip is on agricultural science. If you're doing 8 full belts of every science, then I would say you should design agricultural for 9 belts. Because you don't actually need to care that much about freshness if you top up your belts halfway down the labs. Because agricultural goes through the science belt faster than any of the other sciences, because the freshness of the pack gets calculated in the duration that it spends in this lab. So you can try to optimize the last 10% of the freshness, or you can take an extra belt, which is the one I'm having here, it's not even full, bring it halfway down the lab, and literally just dump a little bit of a top up around on that one belt. I'm doing this here with the same clock that I'm using for the agricultural insertion, and if that's not active, then it gets crushed here eventually. Basically I have a little bit of back pressure system here when I am researching with agricultural, which I'm detecting by reading the hand of this inserter. Then I am not letting these inserters crush the agricultural science back. Otherwise, that's all of what these guys are doing. So right now, because I'm researching research prod, there's a little bit of back pressure that you push against these belts, and so these the result is that the agri belt always has something available for all the labs, but the downside is that the agricultural science is less fresh. But that's not actually that big of a problem. As you can see right now, yeah, this is down to 80%. That's probably lower than I ideally want. But the end result is that you go through those things faster. So they end up being used, you have to crush them. And to a certain point, you can keep filling things in. You just don't want to overdo it. Gotta find a balance. But this solves a lot of the problem, because the normal problem is that the belt runs out somewhere around the end here, and with that you can avoid this. So those are the few tips for the hub. There's a linked blueprint. You can extract the bits that you want, the circuitry or whatever, if you're interested. But for the sake of brevity, I'll just end this video here with 1 minute of hub footage without me talking. My name is Klux, thanks for watching.